Hi, everyone. I'm Vladimir Dutit. We are watching all the stories coming into the CBS News Broadcast Center from our partners here in the United States and around the world. If it is happening there, we're going to take you there live right here. This is CBS News 24/7. Right now, we're standing by for what could be a series of consequential decisions from the Supreme Court. But did we already get a spoiler to one of the biggest cases on the docket? We'll tell you what we know. The stage is set. The candidates are prepped, and we are just hours away from the first debate between President Biden and former President Donald Trump. And a dramatic showdown with the president of Bolivia after soldiers storm his official residence at the palace in an attempted coup. We're going to dig into that a little bit later in the hour, but we begin this morning with the Supreme Court. Feels like Groundhog Day. We could be getting a series of rulings on consequential cases that could be coming any minute. Still on the docket, cases involving presidential immunity claims, January 6th, and abortion access. A draft of that opinion was apparently released by mistake yesterday. CBS News campaign reporter and attorney Katrina Kaufman is standing outside of the Supreme Court. Katrina, a couple of things. Number one, remind us of the cases we're still waiting on and what we learned about that abortion case that was leaked yesterday. How did it get leaked after that Dobbs decision was leaked a few months ago?
That's a great question, Vlad. It seems like this was a little bit different. It appears to have been a technical error. A Bloomberg reporter spotted it on the Supreme Court's website, quickly downloaded it, and then disseminated it to everyone. And we don't know if this is the final version of the opinion. The court did acknowledge that this had happened, so it doesn't seem like the situation with Dobbs where that was intentionally leaked, but it is interesting that this is another abortion-related case. And if this ruling stands, the court has decided that they actually took this case too early. They're going to send it back to the lower court, and that's also going to remove a stay that they had put on the injunction of the Idaho law at issue. And so the issue here was that Idaho has a near total ban on abortion, and that conflicts with a federal law known as EMTALA that is a broader law, but the way it intersects with Idaho's law is that it would allow for abortions on women when they're at serious health risk in emergency situations, whereas in Idaho, the ban only allows exceptions for rape, incest, or if the life of the mother is at risk. She's at risk of death. If this ruling is going to stay in place, it means that women in Idaho will be able to still get abortions under EMTALA, that doctors won't have to be worried about criminal prosecution for the moment, though, because it's not a final ruling on the merits. So as this case then moves back through the lower courts, it could change the situation there. The other two cases that we're really looking out for that you alluded to are both related to former President Donald Trump. One is his claim to presidential immunity. He says that presidents are immune from criminal prosecution, and this implicates the D.C. election interference case that special counsel Jack Smith has brought against him. That case is on hold while we wait for a decision from the court that could impact, in the short term, that case, but on a larger scale, the American presidency. And then there's the January 6th case, which is about the riot that took place on the Capitol on January 6th. This case was brought by one of those rioters, a former police officer, Joseph Fisher, and he says that this statute related to obstruction of an official proceeding that was brought against him doesn't apply in this scenario. And the way it relates back to Trump is that two of the charges in the D.C. case implicate that same statute.
All right, Katrina, you're outside of the Supreme Court. We're going to get back to you a little bit later. We expect some decisions today. We'll be talking about it. All right, folks, another big story that we're tracking right here in the newsroom, the weather. Temperatures will reach over 100 degrees in parts of Texas today as intense heat lingers in the Lone Star State. CBS News correspondent Omar Villafranca is on the ground for us in Plano, Texas. So, Omar, a couple of things. What are officials saying about this intense heat? What are resources like for people to stay cool? And what does it feel like to you?
Hey, Vlad, we are here in Plano, Texas right now. Heat advisory here in the North Texas area as we speak. Temperatures are not going to get into the triple digits. We're looking at the upper 90s, but the feels like temperature, which is what we call it, will obviously be in the triple digits right now. But this is what we like to call the pre-bake. This is not the full heat that we expect late July and August, where people don't even want to come outside. This is kind of the pre-bake. But a place where people come to cool down is a place like this right now. We're at one of the public pools here in Plano, Texas. You can see pretty fantastic. It'll be opening up later on this morning. I want to show you something over here. People come to a pool to get sun, but with the heat that we get over here, they even have to have shaded areas for the kids out here and for the parents. But these facilities are getting a lot more popular because of the heat down here. I was talking to some folks here in the city of Plano who were saying they're seeing record numbers starting to come into facilities like this during the day. They open up at 10 for the little kids. Noon is when they see the big rush of people who start coming in when they fully open up. But because people are smart about weather over here, around 3 o'clock in the heat of the day is when they notice things start going down and people don't really come out here because it's just too brutal. But of course it picks up once the sun starts going down and the heat starts letting off. So again, people who have to be outside, the same typical things. Make sure you hydrate, take breaks, wear sunscreen, and they can't stress enough, hydrate, hydrate, hydrate. Cooling centers are open. They're not exactly busy because it's not exactly the brutal heat that we had, especially like last year, where at night the coolest it'll get will maybe 92 degrees. But something like this, people are getting ready. We're kind of getting mentally ready for the fact and making sure all of our air conditioners are working. Vlad?
All right, Omar, stay cool out there. And if that dude's not in that pool by his next live shot, I don't know what. All right, Omar, thanks, man. Millions of people across the Midwest are still dealing with rising river waters from the historic flooding we've been talking about all week long. That water damaged towns in the Dakotas, Minnesota, and Iowa, and parts of the Northeast are still cleaning up this morning after severe thunderstorms slammed the region with heavy rain and strong winds causing damage in a bunch of different areas. So let's bring in CBS News Philadelphia meteorologist Grant Gilmore with the first look at the national forecast.
At home, look, you know, all this heat that we're talking about, really the fuel for a lot of the severe weather that we've been tracking over the last several days. Let's talk about the temperatures for where we start across the area today, because many parts of the deep south into the southern plains still working with not just those daytime highs that are soaring into the upper 90s to the triple digits, but it's also the overnight lows. Omar was talking about how you get into the summertime, July and August, where those temperatures barely drop into the low 90s, if not maybe the upper 80s if you're lucky. Right now, Dallas starting the day with temperatures in the mid 80s, and then it only warms from there, and that's why they do have those heat advisories in effect. Let me show you the latest heat advisories that we have across portions of the southern plains. Now, there are some heat advisories in effect for portions of the Carolinas today, but back into Dallas, temperatures today are expected to soar into the upper 90s to the lower 100s, but the feels like temperatures could exceed 112 degrees in some places. Now, here's the forecast for Dallas, because Omar was talking about how it's a pre-bake. Well, this is a long bake, too. You're looking at temperatures today near 97 degrees in Dallas, 101 tomorrow, 100 on Saturday. Look at the chance of rain, near zero, so very little relief through the heat of the day as those temperatures stay near 100 degrees all the way through the weekend. And then you talk about those feels like temperatures, 110, 112, and that extends well across the deep south, even portions of Florida dealing with abnormally warm temperatures. Feels like temperatures in Jacksonville at 104. The north and east got some relief, but again, that came by way of severe weather through the late hours yesterday. Vlad, back to you.
All right, Grant, and I guess you definitely that gray suit, blue tie memo, or I don't know, what's going on? Are we already feeling each other?
You're looking good, man, looking good.
Right back at you, brother. All right, Iranians will vote for their next president tomorrow in a major election that will have international implications after former President Ibrahim Raisi died in a helicopter crash earlier this year. CBS News senior foreign correspondent Elizabeth Palmer is in Iran and has more on this crucial election.
61 million Iranians are eligible to vote tomorrow, and the government's preoccupation right now is convincing at least half of them to turn out to the polls. But evidence suggests that there is widespread apathy. Certainly most people we've talked to have said they are going to stay home. They're disillusioned, they're fed up, and they know that the supreme leader in this country calls the shots. So whoever wins won't have the power to change the big things that would make a difference. First and foremost, improving relations with the West, curbing the nuclear program, and those things would in turn result in sanctions being lifted. And that's the key to improvement in millions of lives. But at the moment, there's simply no chance that's going to happen. Vlad?
All right, Liz, we'll be watching. Thank you very much. Got a lot more news coming in right now. We're keeping a close eye on the rulings coming in from the Supreme Court, of course. You are streaming CBS News 24/7. All right, welcome back, folks. We've just gotten our first rulings from the Supreme Court just moments ago. Defense attorney and former federal prosecutor Scott Frederickson joins me now to talk about this. So two rulings, Scott, not the major ones, not the contentious ones that everyone's been waiting for, but pretty significant. One having to do with the EPA, another one with bankruptcy protection for Purdue Pharma.
Right. Well, you're exactly right, Vlad. These are not the sexy decisions we're waiting for, the January 6th case, the presidential immunity, but still very important. In one case, the court has denied or essentially put on hold the attempt by the SEC to enforce a regulation that controls pollution emitted by one state that may blow over or go over into other states. It's called the good neighbor rule, and the court has said, no, you're not authorized to enforce that rule. So that's an important, not only for restricting the power of the EPA, but also what it means for other federal agencies. The other ruling is the opioid ruling. There was a multi-billion-dollar settlement reached by the opioid manufacturer, Pharma. But what was critical as part of that bankruptcy settlement, it was Purdue Pharma had filed for bankruptcy, and a plan was approved to provide for billions of dollars to be paid for the victims, but it provided a shield for the Sackler family who owned Purdue Pharma. It shielded them from any civil liability. Today, the Supreme Court said that shield is not allowed as part of our bankruptcy code. So that deal is done, it's off, and it's back to the bankruptcy court. For those who were critical of the shield provided to the Sackler family, that's a victory. For those who wanted the multi-billion-dollar payout to the victims, it means a longer process and another day in the bankruptcy court.
Scott, real quick before we let you go, does it appear to you in your time as a lawyer that the EPA, over several successive rulings, both at the Supreme Court and at the lower court level, has been weakened significantly over the years since it was first formed?
Oh, Vlad, you're completely right. We've seen a whole string of decisions. It's almost as if the Supreme Court has its eye out for the SEC. But we're expecting one more decision that will deal, in all likelihood, an even more powerful blow, not only to the EPA, but all of the federal agencies. Again, this is not a decision that sounds, real popular for people to follow, but it's called, it relates to what's called the Chevron decision, which historically has said that courts have to defer to federal agencies interpreting ambiguous laws. And this Chevron if you will, interpretation has existed for decades. This Supreme Court, in all likelihood, is going to wipe that away and say, no, the federal agency, whether it be EPA or another agency, has no right to make that interpretation. It has to go back either to the courts to make that determination or to Congress. That will change a universe of regulations that have been interpreted by the agencies in our federal government.
Remarkable that many of these agencies were put into place to protect the little guy. Really fascinating to see what's happening. Scott, as always, thank you, my friend. We'll check back in with you a little later if we get some more decisions. All right, we mentioned those northeast thunderstorms overnight. They actually triggered a ground stop at some major New York City airports last night ahead of what the FAA administrator predicts will be the busiest travel day in years as people get out of town for the 4th of July holiday.
The holidays, people tend to go earlier, and Thursday is the big day. So this is probably going to be the busiest travel day of the year. Certainly the busiest travel day we've seen in at least 15 years.
All right, our Meg Oliver's at Newark's International Airport. Meg, we were laughing about it on CBS Mornings because it feels like it's a little early to be traveling for the 4th of July, but if the FAA administrator says this is the day, what are you seeing on the ground there?
I know, it is a little early, right? I took off the 4th of July, and I'm traveling next Wednesday, Vlad. But apparently the country's really excited to celebrate our birthday because, as you mentioned, today is expected to be the busiest travel day of the year with more than 53,000 flights taking off across the country. We're at Newark International Airport. Take a look behind me. Doesn't look too bad right now. The lines aren't too bad. Parking wasn't a problem. Things are smooth sailing here. Last night, it was a different story. We had a ground stoppage here along with some other airports in the region. But today, the sun is out. People are ready to travel. But as we know, throughout the day, the crowds are expected to pick up. So what can you do? We all know the rules. First of all, pack your patience. Check the schedule, check the weather, and arrive early. And Vlad, in case you're wondering where are all these people going, TripAdvisor has the top 5 destinations over the 4th of July. It includes Las Vegas, Myrtle Beach, Orlando, Honolulu, and can you guess where number 5 is?
Oh, man, I want to say New York City. Come on, the Big Apple.
Oh, you got it. You got it. Perfect.
Only a born and bred New Yorker would ever think that. We see the center of the universe as being right here. Meg, thank you
so probably avoid Times Square.
Yeah, no, yeah, boy, I wish I could. And where are you headed?
I'm headed down to the beach in North Carolina.
That's where you go every year. I love it. All right, Meg Oliver for us at Newark Liberty International Airport. We love you, Meg. Thank you. This year's first presidential debate is just hours away. It's happening in Atlanta. President Biden and former President Donald Trump have gone head-to-head on the debate stage before. Of course, that was back in 2020, but a lot has changed. Here to talk more are CBS News campaign reporters Olivia Rinaldi and Aaron Navarro. All right, Aaron, let's begin with you. How has President Biden prepped for this debate? We haven't seen him in a couple of days.
Well, I'm here at this labor union breakfast in Atlanta, but for the past 6 days, President Biden has been in Maryland at Camp David with senior White House advisors, campaign officials, and former advisors, as they've been there starting with informal chats about policy. But CBS News has learned in recent days they have started the mock debate process. We know that his personal lawyer, Bob Bauer, who has a history with helping Democratic nominees and debates, is reprising his role from 2020 as playing Trump in these mock debates. And topics-wise, we're going to hear President Biden mention Trump's corporate tax plan, saying that it's him neglecting the middle class while helping some of his wealthier friends, and also abortion rights is expected to be brought up. We're going to hear President Biden tie Trump to the Dobbs decision and suggest that he, President Trump, supports a national abortion ban. This is a big topic and tenet of the Biden campaign messaging.
All right, Aaron. Olivia, let me ask you, how is former President Trump prepared for this debate? We saw him asking his supporters, should he be nice or not so nice? What are you hearing?
Yeah, Vlad, I'm hearing that Trump's debate prep has been vastly different than President Biden's. As Aaron noted, President Biden has been up at Camp David doing some pretty intense debate prep. And the Trump team tells me that's not quite what they're doing. Trump has been making these informal policy discussion calls to aides and allies. It's really off the riff, him calling people and saying, well, what do you think about this? How should I approach this type of issue? That's really what we're hearing there. They're trying to make that stark contrast that they don't need all that debate prep that Biden needs. And instead, Trump has been doing his own debate prep when he's been holding his rallies, perhaps when he's been doing interviews. That is how he's been treating his debate prep. But on his personality and how he's going to approach this debate, I've been told by several officials that they've cautioned Trump to show up and act presidential, to act deliberate, to talk about his record, not the personal attacks, but to talk specifically about Trump's record on the economy, to try to create that contrast between him and President Biden tonight on that debate stage.
All right, Olivia, we know he always follows that advice. We'll be watching. Olivia and Aaron, thanks very much. Appreciate it. And don't forget, you can follow along with CBS News 24/7 for the first presidential debate. Coverage will begin streaming today at 5 p.m. Eastern on America Decides. The debate begins at 9 p.m. Eastern. All right, folks, we're also keeping a close eye on rulings coming in from the Supreme Court. You are streaming CBS News 24/7.
This is a CBS News special report. I'm Nora O'Donnell in Washington, D.C. We have breaking news from the Supreme Court in another case that impacts abortion rights in America. This follows the justice's decision to overturn Roe v. Wade ruling 2 years ago. Now, this time, the court was asked to decide if doctors can perform abortions to treat a serious medical emergency in a state with a near total abortion ban. We got an idea of how the court would rule on Wednesday when a draft version of the decision was accidentally uploaded to the Supreme Court website. Then it was quickly taken down. Let's get right to CBS News Chief Legal Correspondent Jan Crawford with the ruling. Jan, what did the justices decide?
Well, I mean, this appears to track exactly like that brief glimpse we got yesterday of the draft opinion, where you have 5 justices, a coalition of conservatives and liberals coming together to dismiss this case, which would send it back to the lower courts in Idaho for further study. Now, why that is important, as Justice Kagan points out in her opinion today, she was one of the 5, we should dismiss this case, she agrees, and in doing so, that will prevent Idaho from enforcing its abortion ban when the termination of a pregnancy is needed to prevent serious harm to a woman's health. And that was the issue. Idaho had passed, as you said, one of the most restrictive laws banning abortion in the country after the justices overturned Roe v. Wade 2 years ago. It allowed abortions only to save a mother's life and in cases of rape or incest. The Biden administration sued. They pointed to a federal law that guarantees emergency room care, stabilizing care for patients. And they said that care could include abortions when a mother was facing serious health complications. Idaho law, only abortions where the life is at stake. So they said there was a conflict. The federal judge below said, yes, there is a conflict, and the federal law trumps this Idaho law, and he put it on hold. So today, we're back there. The law, the Idaho law, is on hold. Those abortions can resume in the state of Idaho, and Idaho is one of 6 states with these kind of bans. So this case goes beyond Idaho potentially as well.
But just to remind the real world situation, let's say you are a pregnant woman, you are having a miscarriage, you go into the emergency room in Idaho, and doctors there, OBGYNs, wrote in a letter as part of this filing to the Supreme Court, they were concerned that they could be prosecuted if they gave an abortion to this woman who had had a miscarriage, unless it was to save the life of the mother, that legal distinction. The question was, what about the health of the mother? What if this threatens her health and fertility in the future? And Associated Press had pointed out that because of this concern by doctors, 6 patients had been medevaced out of the state of Idaho in order to get care. So the real world effect today is what for pregnant women if they believe, and their doctors believe, their health is at risk?
Under what the court has done today, those abortions should be able to resume in Idaho. But you're absolutely right. And we've spoken to so many doctors about this, and doctors who are there on the ground in Idaho. And they're grateful. I mean, we talked to one yesterday who said she was grateful that the court has kind of restored the status quo, but there's still confusion. There's still fear. This is a felony in Idaho that doctors could be facing if they run afoul of this Idaho law. So while, yes, there may be some relief that it's resorted back to the status quo, the law, the abortions can resume in these medical emergencies, that's still a lot of uncertainty there in that state. And I will say 1 in 5 OBs have left the state of Idaho since the court overturned Roe
That's
versus
right.
Wade.
22%. Idaho has lost 22% of their OBGYNs because those doctors say, I don't want to deal with the legal issues. So that has affected general care for women in the state of Idaho.
The legal issues and the threats, the repercussions of laws like this, the uncertainty about what you can and cannot do, what care can be provided, all of these come, Nora, in an atmosphere of great uncertainty. And when the court took this case up, it created 6 months of this actual law taking effect and 6 women's lives being materially disrupted. And when the court took it up, it said, we'll decide this case on the merits. As Jan will tell the audience, it is not deciding this case on the merits. It's not deciding whether this 1986 federal law universally protects care that stabilizes the health of a woman in distress. It does not. This means this will come back, and to put this in a political context, Nora, we have a debate tonight between two presidential candidates. And the last time they met, Joe Biden said abortion is on the ballot. Donald Trump said, what do you mean abortion's on the ballot? And Joe Biden said abortion rights in this country will be affected in the future. They are now. They're on the ballot in every state in the country, and this conversation will continue with long-lasting political effects.
Because this would not be an issue before the Supreme Court had not the Biden administration sued the state of Idaho.
Right.
And had the Supreme Court not issued the Dobbs opinion.
I have to say, again, you know, I'm going through some of these opinions. It is an unusual coalition of justices. You have two liberals, Justice Kagan and Justice Sotomayor, and then you have the Chief Justice, Justice Amy Coney Barrett and Justice Brett Kavanaugh coming together to dismiss this case, which then, as we said, restores the status quo, allows these abortions to resume. But Justice Barrett, in her opinion, emphasizes that when they took the case, the law looked very different. In that interim, the Idaho Supreme Court has weighed in, the legislature has weighed in, and they have said in Idaho, these kind of abortions for serious medical emergencies are allowed even under the Idaho law. So they've given this guidance. Justice Barrett is saying the case has changed. We need to have this go back to the lower courts. But again, to Nora's, your point, the doctors still feel right now tremendous uncertainty.
I want to bring in Jessica Levinson, our CBS News legal contributor and also a Loyola Law School professor. Jessica, it is so good to have you. This one is interesting, as we have just been talking about. Why is it unsigned, and why did Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson write a partial dissent?
So per curiam means it's from the court. And what Justice Jackson said is, I'm ready to decide. She said, why are we sending this back down? I'm looking at a federal law, and the federal law says stabilizing treatment, and that includes life or health. And I'm looking at a state law, and the state law says only abortions for life. And what she's saying is there's a difference there, life and health versus life. That's a conflict. And she's saying, I'm looking at the supremacy clause in the Constitution. There's so many complicated constitutional questions, but this isn't one of them. When you have a federal law and a state law and they conflict, then the federal law wins. So I think that's what she's saying legally. I think she's also frustrated because, well, I believe that Justice Barrett is correct, that things changed since they took the case. Idaho said their exception is broader, and the federal government, frankly, I think also said their mandate is narrower. So that daylight arguably did collapse a bit between the two laws. But I don't think Justice Jackson wants to send this back down. She says, I'm ready. This was briefed. Let's go. And that's why we have this separate concurring dissenting opinion from her.
I mean,
this
is so
fiery,
fascinating.
too. I mean,
Yeah.
Jessica is absolutely right. I mean, it is fiery. I mean, she says today's decision is not a victory for pregnant patients in Idaho. It is delay. And then she goes on to say the court had a chance to bring clarity and certainty to this tragic situation, and we have squandered it. So she is alone in saying that. You do have the three conservatives, some of the most conservative justices, kind of saying, agreeing with her on one point, yeah, we should have decided this today. We don't want to dismiss it. But they would have ruled for Idaho. So like we said, we have those five who are saying we're going to dismiss it. As Jessica discussed, Justice Jackson's like, no, we're ready. Let's go. We need to decide this now. This is just more delay. And then you have the three conservatives saying we need to decide this now, too, because we think Idaho's law is perfectly fine.
Once again, a reminder that abortion rights, reproductive rights, not only an issue in state races, in legislatures, but also before the Supreme Court as people still deal with the overturning of Roe versus Wade 2 years ago.
And this is the first case for the court to look at, a state ban criminalizing abortion. This is the first one they've had since they overturned Roe versus Wade.
And when the court decided, Dobbs, overturning Roe versus Wade, it said states will be laboratories and they will experiment. Well, those in Idaho who oppose abortion rights wrote this law, and as soon as it was scrutinized, as soon as it became clear what the ramifications of it were, they began to backpedal under legal pressure and the visibility of what the implications of that law actually were. So this laboratory idea, yes, it's playing out, but trapped in the middle of that laboratory experimentation are women who have pronounced medical concerns, health risks, and they don't know where to go, and doctors don't know how to intervene.
Who fear prosecution. Jen, I do want to ask you, too, because, well, tonight we'll be watching and covering here on CBS that presidential debate. We have more decisions coming tomorrow from the Supreme Court, important decisions.
Yes, I mean, today's case, of course, one of several major decisions that we have been waiting on, including two involving former President Trump. One, whether he is immune from prosecution for his actions around January 6th and efforts to interfere with the 2020 election. And then if he's not immune, what can he be prosecuted for? Those are major questions that the court is poised to resolve either tomorrow or perhaps sometime next week that will have a direct impact on Special Counsel Jack Smith and whether he can bring this case to trial before the election.
Important news from here in Washington. Just to remind everybody, once again, the breaking news from the Supreme Court. The justices ruled that emergency abortions are allowed in Idaho in rare cases to protect a woman's health. And of course, this will have implications in the 5 other states that have this near total ban. Our coverage will continue on CBS News 24/7, your local news, and a full wrap-up tonight on the CBS Evening News. And as I mentioned, we're going to see you tonight for coverage of that presidential debate and where we can expect to hear from the candidates on these very important issues. This has been a CBS News special report. I'm Norah O'Donnell.
All right, folks, you've been watching a CBS News special report, and if you were watching, you know that the Supreme Court has decided another case that impacts abortion rights in America. The court has ruled to allow doctors to perform abortions to treat serious medical emergencies in the state of Idaho. That is a state with a near total abortion ban. This follows the justice's decision to overturn Roe versus Wade 2 years ago. Now, we got an idea of how the court would rule on Wednesday when a draft version of that decision was accidentally uploaded to the Supreme Court website. It was quickly taken down, but we had a little preview. So let's continue to dig into what this ruling means with defense attorney and former federal prosecutor Scott Frederickson, who joins me now. CBS News campaign reporter Shawna Mizell is also joining us. Scott, let me begin with you, and let's dig into a little bit of what we heard at the end of the special report. The implications that this ruling will have for the other states that have similar near total abortion bans on the books. What does it mean for them?
Well, that's a great question. And unfortunately, I think the Supreme Court's decision today leaves that a bit unclear. Keep in mind, this decision today reinstates an injunction issued by the lower court, which means in Idaho, abortions can go forward where it is necessary to stabilize a woman's health. That likely means in the other 6 states, that is the law now. What I mean when I say it's somewhat ambiguous is that the Supreme Court today dismissed the case. It did not issue a substantive opinion. It said this case should not have come before us. It was improvidently granted, so they're sending it back for further litigation. All that means is that we're going to see a lot more litigation about this and related abortion cases. For the time being, it's a victory for those who have challenged the Idaho law in connection with the federal statute, which mandates that all hospitals anywhere are required to provide care to stabilize a patient in emergency situations. So for now, that is the law. But it also means that for now, we're going to see a lot more litigation. And I would add that Justice Jackson, in his very strong dissent, pointed out that essentially talking to her colleagues that we're ducking that issue when we are perfectly prepared to address it today. 3 other conservative justices essentially agreed with her as well. But in the end, that will come at another day. For now, the law is that the Idaho hospitals and others in those other 6 states who are restrictive abortion laws must provide abortions to women when their health requires it to stabilize their situation.
All right, Scott, thank you so much for standing by for these decisions. We'll be talking with you as we await more decisions, perhaps tomorrow or even next week. Thank you very much. As promised, CBS News campaign reporter Shauna Mizell joins us now. So let's talk about reproductive rights, Shauna, and how they've been such a big campaign issue. There's a big debate tonight. How do we expect the candidates to address the decision from the Supreme Court today?
Vlad, good morning. We're already here in Atlanta ahead of tonight's debate. And in the wake of this decision, the Biden campaign is already responding. We have a senior advisor to the Biden campaign on this Supreme Court decision saying women's health, lives, and freedoms remain in peril across the country because of Donald Trump, because of Trump's Supreme Court majority overturned Roe versus Wade. Women are being turned away from emergency rooms and forced to the brink of death before receiving the care they need. You can almost expect Joe Biden to similarly take this approach tonight on the debate stage. We know abortion has been a huge part of Biden's re-election campaign and platform, and it is one of the issues that he says should be top of mind for voters, and he is really hoping that this is one of the issues that will propel him back to the White House, particularly in some of those swing states where we could see abortion on the ballot, like Arizona and Nevada.
So, Shauna, you've been on the campaign trail all year long. What are voters telling you? And not so much voters who are Democrats who already plan to vote for President Biden, or even Republicans who already plan to vote for Donald Trump. I want to know about those undecided voters, those people in the middle, perhaps independent, perhaps suburban women. What are they telling you?
That's the really interesting part, Vlad. This issue of abortion really has voters split and rethinking how they've talked about this issue in previous years since the Dobbs decision. You've seen issues like IVF procedures kind of come into focus, and now it has become a whole gambit of reproductive rights. So those undecided voters, even voters who say they support former President Donald Trump, are still trying to quell that opinion with believing that women should have access to abortion. And even those who don't believe in abortion are trying to reconcile that with kind of seeing that they believe some women should have access to abortions in certain cases like incest or rape.
All right, Shauna Mizell reporting for us from Atlanta, where that debate is happening tonight. Shauna, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Let's continue to dig into this with Elizabeth Sepper. She's a professor of law at the University of Texas, and she joins me now. So Elizabeth, give our viewers a little sense of the history of this case. And I'm particularly intrigued by Associate Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson's fiery dissent. Break that down for us.
This case originates from a lawsuit the Biden administration filed against Idaho. There's a conflict in Idaho between the Federal Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act, which requires stabilizing treatment, including abortion, for emergency medical conditions. That includes conditions where someone's health is in serious jeopardy. But Idaho's abortion ban says doctors can't provide emergency abortion care unless a woman's life is at stake. And so there's a conflict between these two laws. The Biden administration prevailed at early stages in the trial court, receiving a preliminary injunction against the Idaho law. So doctors were momentarily allowed to perform emergency abortions consistent with EMTALA. The case then went up to the Court of Appeals, the Ninth Circuit, at which point the Supreme Court reached out and took the case before the Ninth Circuit could issue any opinion or even hear the case on the merits. And at that point in time, the Supreme Court stayed the trial court's preliminary injunction, which meant that EMTALA did not apply to pregnant people in Idaho since January, so that lots of women were airlifted out of the state because they could not receive emergency treatment in Idaho emergency departments. And so Justice Jackson really reprimanded the conservative majority of the Supreme Court. It was clear the conservative justices had determined to reach out and take this case early, had determined to leave Idaho women without emergency abortion care for 5 months. And then here we are at the end of June, and suddenly they have changed their minds. And what she reminds us is this just delays the inevitable, that these cases will be back at the U.S. Supreme Court probably after the election.
All right, Professor Elizabeth Sepper, thank you very much. We appreciate you. CBS News campaign reporter, attorney Katrina Kaufman is standing by outside the Supreme Court. Katrina, so three big cases out of the way today. What are we waiting on? Everybody is hoping that we will get that decision on January 6th and presidential immunity. What are your thoughts?
We're waiting for both of those decisions, and a lot of people think that immunity will probably be the last one that this court puts out. I mean, the Supreme Court can be unpredictable. As of now, tomorrow is the final opinion day on the calendar, but it's starting to seem quite likely that this could bleed into next week. And of course, that immunity case is about whether or not a president is immune from criminal prosecution. The other big case that we're still waiting on is Fisher, which is about the January 6th Capitol rioters and whether or not the obstruction of an official proceeding statute that was used in hundreds of these cases can stand. That statute has always been used in relation to the destruction of documents or records, which is a really different context than the storming of the Capitol. And that case has important implications for the D.C. election interference case against Donald Trump, which also has obstruction of an official proceeding in two elements of the charges.
All right, Katrina, I hope you've booked an extended stay at your hotel. Thanks so much. We'll be checking in with you, I'm sure, tomorrow and perhaps even next week. All right, folks, we got a lot more news coming in live right now. You can see it happening all behind me right now, but stay with us. You are streaming CBS News 24/7. All right, the Supreme Court has decided a case that impacts abortion rights across the country. The court has ruled to allow doctors to perform abortions to treat a serious medical emergency in the state of Idaho. That state has a near total abortion ban. Now, this follows the justice's decision to overturn Roe versus Wade 2 years ago. So I want to bring in CBS News Chief White House Correspondent Nancy Cordes. Nancy, the White House was very, very quick with that statement as soon as the official decision was rendered.
Right, and we're hearing first and foremost from the Biden campaign, Vlad. They did quickly release that statement. I can read part of it to you. They say women's health, lives, and freedoms remain in peril across the country because of Donald Trump. So they're clearly trying to shift the attention back to Donald Trump, who Joe Biden will be debating here in Atlanta later on today. We're still waiting to hear from the president himself from the White House. We're expecting to hear from the vice president as well. I'm told that that will come soon. But for now, the Biden campaign is trying to make this all about Donald Trump. The fact that he appointed conservative justices who led the way in removing Roe v. Wade in the first place. And that's something that we know Biden is going to try to bring up tonight at the debate as well.
So the other question about the debate, Nancy, that I have is what other topics is the president expected to bring up, specifically as it relates to January 6th? We're still awaiting a decision from the Supreme Court on that, presidential immunity, and on the convictions that Donald Trump faced here in New York.
No question Biden is going to try to bring up January 6th tonight as part of a larger theme that he's looking to strike about Donald Trump and what the campaign says is his dangerous approach to power. They are going to say that Trump simply cannot be trusted to sit in the Oval Office once again. Biden is going to hammer home that Trump is now a convicted felon. He's going to say that he has courted political violence and that he has been involved in efforts to chip away at democracy. So that's going to be a big theme you hear from Joe Biden tonight. And obviously, January 6th and the insurrection is all tied up in that, whether we have that Supreme Court decision about immunity in time or not.
All right. Nancy Cordes for us in Atlanta. Nancy, thanks very much. We'll check back in with you a little bit later. Appreciate it. All right. CBS News campaign reporter and attorney Katrina Kaufman is still standing outside of the Supreme Court. Katrina, just when you thought you were out, they pull you back in. But I want to ask you about not just the big case that came down today. Tell us about tomorrow, the cases that we're still waiting on. And I'm still really hoping to get some insight into Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson's dissent, why she felt compelled to explain in her dissent that the court was not living up to its responsibility.
I'm glad that you brought that up because I think that her dissent brought up some really important points. She concurred with this decision in the sense that it is now allowing EMTALA, this federal law, to take precedence over the state near total abortion ban in Idaho. But she dissented in the sense that she thinks the court really should have ruled on the merits in this case because the Supreme Court is just leaving this in limbo. And she said that the mechanism that they used to send it back down to the lower courts, it's known as a dig, is a tool that's not supposed to be used in cases where the court just doesn't want to make a decision on this issue ultimately. And I think the political consequences of this are very important because it now pushes this issue to potentially after the election when we could have a new administration, possibly under former President Donald Trump, where they could dismiss this lawsuit altogether or perhaps interpret this law, EMTALA, in a different way. And so it really still leaves abortion rights in Idaho and all of these other states hanging in the balance.
All right, Katrina, thank you so much. Maybe we'll check back in with you a little bit later before this hour's up. And if we do, we thank you. Let's bring in Stephen Wormiel. He's a professor of practice at American University, Washington College of Law. All right, Professor, so let me get your reaction specifically to this Idaho decision.
Well, I agree with Katrina that I think what she was saying about Justice Jackson, this just puts the issue off for another day. What the court is essentially saying is we shouldn't have stepped in when we did. We should have let this proceed in the federal court in Idaho. And so it'll go back there. There's likely to be a trial. Again, to the earlier point, if there's a different president in the White House and they decide not to continue to push the federal law allowing emergency abortions, then all of this might go away and Idaho might be allowed to continue to enforce its law prohibiting most abortions.
Let me also ask you, Professor, about this other ruling that has to deal with the environment and specifically the EPA. And it's sort of a broader question about the weakening of some of the federal agencies that were established to protect ordinary Americans. I'm specifically talking about the Environmental Protection Agency and other organizations like the SEC. It does feel as if the courts have successfully weakened those institutions. Why do you think that's happening?
I think it's been an agenda item for conservative justices and conservative lawyers for a long time to try to curtail the power of federal agencies because they're, in their view, not elected. They're not sufficiently accountable and exercise too much power. And so I think that's coming to a head with two decisions today. One about the Securities and Exchange Commission and one about the Environmental Protection Agency. And I think we're going to see more of that.
All right, Professor Stephen Wormiel, thank you very much for your insights, sir. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to have the headlines throughout the day in our midday show at noon. You can see it happening behind me right now. These are news feeds coming into the CBS News Broadcast Center. We're going to bring it to you right here. You're streaming CBS News 24/7.